The party was on the 50th floor of a shiny glass building that looked over the whole city. Outside the windows, the lights were twinkling like stars, but inside, the room was even brighter. Huge chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm, golden glow over everyone. There were people everywhere. The men wore dark suits that looked very expensive, and the women wore dresses that sparkled under the lights. The air smelled like rich food, expensive perfume, and flowers. It was the kind of place where money seemed to float in the air, invisible but powerful. Maya stood near the wall, holding a heavy silver tray filled with tall glasses of champagne. Her feet hurt. She had been walking around for hours, smiling at people who did not even look at her. To them, she was just part of the furniture. She was there to fill their empty glasses and take their dirty plates, and then disappear. They did not know her name. They did not know she had thoughts or feelings. They just saw the black uniform she wore and moved on. She took a deep breath and stepped back into the crowd. "Excuse me," she said softly, weaving through a group of men who were laughing loudly about something she didn't understand. They didn't move, so she had to squeeze past them, careful not to spill a single drop. A woman in a blue dress took a glass from her tray without saying thank you. She didn't even make eye contact. Maya just nodded and kept moving. She was used to it. As she made her way across the room, her eyes were drawn, as they always were, to the corner. There, sitting alone and bathed in a soft spotlight, was a grand piano. It was a massive, beautiful instrument, black and shiny. It looked like a sleeping beast waiting to wake up. No one was playing it. It just sat there while people walked past it, holding their drinks and talking loudly. Maya slowed down as she got closer to the piano. She felt a strange pull in her chest, a mix of pain and longing. Most people at the party probably thought it was just decoration, something pretty to look at. But to Maya, it was so much more. It was a ghost from her past. Seeing it made her fingers tingle, as if they remembered something her mind tried to forget. Years ago, before life got hard and money got tight, Maya used to be the one sitting on the bench at events like this. She wasn't serving drinks then. She was the one everyone watched. She had spent hours in small rooms practicing scales and chords until her hands hurt. Her teachers used to tell her she had a gift, something special that couldn't be taught. She had played in competitions and won prizes. She had dreams of playing in big concert halls, wearing a long dress, and hearing the applause of thousands of people. But life doesn't always follow the path you dream of. When her father got sick, everything changed. The hospital bills were huge, and the money for her lessons disappeared. There was no time for concerts or competitions. There was only time for work. She had to leave the music school and take whatever job she could find to help her family. The dream of being a pianist slowly faded away, replaced by the reality of rent, groceries, and uniforms. Maya stopped near the piano, pretending to adjust the napkins on her tray, just so she could look at it for a moment longer. The lid was open, showing the strings and hammers inside. It looked perfect. She wondered if it was tuned. She wondered how it would sound in this big room with the high ceilings. She imagined walking over, sitting down, and resting her fingers on the cold ivory keys. For a second, she could almost hear the music in her head, a loud, powerful song that would drown out the noise of the party and make everyone stop talking. But she shook her head slightly and pushed the thought away. That wasn't her life anymore. She was a waitress now, not a musician. If she sat down to play, she would probably get in trouble. Her boss was already watching her closely tonight. She couldn't afford to lose this job. She needed the money too much. "Hey, you!" a sharp voice called out. Maya jumped and turned around. A man was waving at her from across the room, holding up an empty glass. She looked back at the piano one last time, whispering a silent goodbye to the ghost of her past, and then hurried toward the man. "I'm coming, sir," she said, putting her professional smile back on her face. As she walked away, the music from the speakers changed to a fast, pop song that everyone seemed to like. The bass thumped in her chest. She hated this song. It had no soul, no depth. It was just noise. She thought about the beautiful silence of the piano sitting in the corner, waiting for someone who knew how to speak its language. It felt like a waste to her, a crime almost, to have such an incredible instrument ignored while this loud, recorded music played. She reached the man and took his glass. "Another one?" she asked. "Yeah, and make sure it's cold this time," he grumbled, turning back to his friends immediately. Maya nodded and turned back to the bar. She walked carefully, balancing the tray. The room felt hot and stuffy suddenly. She felt a wave of tiredness wash over her. It wasn't just her feet that were tired, it was her heart. Carrying the weight of a secret talent was heavy. Every day she woke up and went to work, pretending she didn't hear the music in her head. Every day she ignored the part of her that wanted to create beauty. She reached the bar and set the dirty glass down. The bartender, a guy named Alex who knew she worked hard, gave her a sympathetic look. "Tough crowd?" he asked, handing her a fresh glass. "They're just people," Maya said with a small shrug. "They don't mean to be rude." Alex laughed. "Some of them definitely mean it. Just keep your head down." Maya took the glass and turned back to the party. She took a moment to scan the room. There was so much wealth here. Diamonds on necklaces, gold on wrists, expensive watches ticking on wrists. Yet, none of it seemed to make anyone truly happy. They were laughing, but it sounded hollow to her ears. They were eating, but they barely tasted the food. And there, in the corner, was the one thing in the room that had real value, the one thing that could actually touch a human soul, and it was sitting empty. She realized then that she wasn't just a waitress serving drinks. She was a keeper of a secret. She knew what that piano could do. She knew the magic it held. And for tonight, that secret was safe with her. She wasn't going to play it. She wasn't going to make a scene. She was going to do her job, collect her pay, and go home to her small apartment. But as she moved back into the crowd to deliver the drink, she felt a strange tension in the air. The host of the party, a very wealthy man who owned a big technology company, was standing near the center of the room. He looked bored. He was looking around the room with a frown, like he was a king who wasn't entertained by his court. He waved his hand at the DJ, shaking his head. Maya watched him. She had seen men like him before. They wanted everything to be perfect, and when it wasn't, they got angry. He started walking toward the corner where the piano was. Maya stopped walking. She watched him stare at the instrument. A bad feeling started to grow in her stomach. She knew how rich people could be when they were bored. They liked games. They liked to be amused. She held her tray tight against her chest and watched, hoping he would just walk past it. But he didn't. He stopped right in front of the piano and ran a finger along the shiny wood. Then, he turned around and looked at the room. His eyes swept over the guests, the waiters, the bartenders. He was looking for something. Or someone. Maya tried to make herself small behind a tall guest, but she couldn't look away. She felt a connection to that piano, and she knew that whatever happened next would involve her, even if she didn't want it to. The music in her head was getting louder, a warning bell ringing in the silence of her mind. The night was about to change. She could feel it. The mood in the room shifted quickly. The man who was hosting the party, a very wealthy man who owned a huge technology company, had clearly drunk too much. He was swaying slightly near the bar, and his face was getting red. He waved his hand in the air, signaling for the DJ to stop the music. The loud, thumping bass faded out, leaving a sudden, awkward silence. People stopped dancing and looked over, wondering what was going to happen next. The host didn't like being bored, and right now, he was very bored. He stumbled away from the bar and walked toward the corner where the grand piano sat. He pointed a finger at the shiny instrument and laughed loudly. "This," he shouted, so everyone could hear him, "is what I call a waste of space. A beautiful instrument, and nobody is touching it." He looked around the room, challenging his guests. "Is there no one here who knows how to play? Are we really just going to stand around and drink all night?" A few people chuckled nervously. No one wanted to be the first to volunteer. They knew the host liked to play games, and they didn't want to become the joke of the evening. The host kicked the leg of the piano bench, not hard, but enough to make a noise. He ran his hand over the keys, pressing them down randomly, creating a messy, clashing sound that made everyone wince. "Come on!" he yelled. "I paid a fortune for this thing. Someone play it." Maya was standing near the back wall, hoping she would become invisible. She held her tray tightly against her chest. Her heart started to beat faster. She knew she shouldn't make eye contact, but she couldn't help it. She was worried about the piano. Seeing a drunk man treat a fine instrument like a toy was painful for her. She winced at the bad notes, and her fingers twitched involuntarily, wanting to fix the sound. The host turned around in a circle, scanning the wait staff, the security guards, and the guests. His eyes moved over the waiters like he was looking at items on a shelf. Suddenly, his gaze stopped. He had spotted Maya. He remembered seeing her looking at the piano earlier with a sad face. A cruel smile spread across his lips. He pointed a finger directly at her. "You there," he called out. "The girl with the black tray. Come here." Maya froze. The guests near her stepped back, creating a clear path between her and the host. It felt like the sea was parting, but she wasn't Moses, she was a sheep being led to slaughter. She shook her head slightly, but the host insisted. "Don't be shy. Come here, come here." She had no choice. She couldn't ignore the man who paid her wages indirectly. She walked slowly toward the center of the room. Every step felt heavy. The spotlight seemed to follow her. The eyes of 50 rich, bored people were fixed on her face. She felt small in her cheap uniform, feeling the sweat starting to prickle on her back. She stopped a few feet away from him and lowered her eyes. "Yes, sir," she asked quietly. "Can I get you a fresh drink, sir?" "I don't want a drink," the host sneered. He looked her up and down, taking in her simple shoes and her tired face. "I saw you looking at this piano earlier. You were looking at it like you missed it? You know how to play this thing, don't you?" A murmur went through the crowd. They sensed a game starting. Maya felt her face get hot. I like the music, sir," she said, choosing her words carefully. "But I am working right now. I really should get back to the tables." Nonsense! The host shouted. The tables can wait. This is a party. We need entertainment. He turned to the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I bet our waitress here has a hidden talent. I bet she knows a song or two. The guests clapped and laughed, some of them whispered to each other. To them, Maya wasn't a person with feelings, she was a curiosity, a break in their routine. They wanted to see what the help could do. Maya felt a wave of humiliation wash over her. She just wanted to do her job and go home. She didn't want to be a performing monkey for their amusement. Please, sir, she tried again, her voice trembling a little. I haven't played in a long time. I'm not very good. I wouldn't want to ruin the evening. The host laughed loudly. Not very good, humble, too. I love it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick roll of cash. He peeled off $100 bill and held it up in the air. The light from the chandelier reflected off the paper. Look at this, he said to the room. $100 for one song. Just play us something. Anything. Even chopsticks. If you play, this is yours. The crowd cheered. Play. 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 A few of them chanted. They banged their glasses on the tables. The pressure was building like a storm. Maya looked at the money. It was a lot of money to her. It would pay for her groceries for 2 weeks. But taking it felt wrong. It felt like he was buying her dignity, piece by piece. She looked around for help, but her boss was standing in the corner, looking stressed. He wouldn't stop the host, he was too afraid of losing the client. The other waiters looked away, feeling sorry for her but glad it wasn't them. She was alone. I really shouldn't, Maya whispered, clutching her tray so hard her knuckles turned white. The host's smile faded. He didn't like being told no, especially not by someone he viewed as the help. His eyes narrowed. He stepped closer to her, invading her personal space. He smelled of expensive whiskey and strong cologne. Look, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low tone that everyone could still hear. I am asking you nicely. Don't be rude. It's just a song. Loosen up. Stop acting like you're too good for us. The words stung. He was turning the situation around, making her seem like the arrogant one. The laughter in the room died down a little. People sensed the tension. They were waiting to see who would break. Maya felt a spark of anger deep inside her chest. It was small, but it was hot. Who was he to treat her like this? He didn't know her story. He didn't know what she had given up. He just saw a uniform and assumed she was uneducated and untalented. He thought he could snap his fingers and she would dance. She took a deep breath. She realized that refusing him now would only cause a scene. He might get angry and kick her out. She needed this job. If she walked out now, she wouldn't get paid for the night. And if she stayed and refused, he might make her life miserable for the rest of the evening. The host waved the money in her face again. Come on. $100. Just sit down. Show us if you have any rhythm. Maya looked at the piano. It sat there, majestic and patient, it was waiting for her. The anger in her chest mixed with a sudden, overwhelming desire to touch the keys. She missed it so much. Her fingers ached to play. Even if it was just to shut this man up, even if it was just to take his money and prove a point, she wanted to play. She didn't reach for the money. Instead, she slowly set her tray down on a small table nearby. She placed the napkin carefully on top. The room went completely silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. The host stepped back, looking pleased with himself. He thought he had won. He thought he had forced the help to entertain him. "Good girl," he said, patting her on the shoulder. "See, it's not so hard." Maya ignored his hand. She didn't look at him. She walked toward the piano bench. Her legs felt weak, but her heart was beating with a new rhythm now. It wasn't fear, it was adrenaline. She sat down on the bench. It was plush and comfortable. She reached up and adjusted the height slightly, a habit she hadn't lost in years. She looked at the keys. They were white and clean, staring back at her like old friends. The host leaned against the side of the piano, crossing his arms. He smirked at his guests, mouthing the word "watch this." Maya placed her hands on her knees for a moment. She closed her eyes and took a breath. She blocked out the smell of the food. She blocked out the sound of the guests shifting in their seats. She blocked out the arrogant man standing next to her. She thought only about the music. She thought about the late nights in her childhood apartment, playing on an old keyboard while her mother cooked dinner. She thought about the feeling of the music flowing through her, the only time she ever felt truly free. She opened her eyes. Her expression changed. The tired, scared look was gone. Her face became calm and focused. She lifted her hands and hovered them over the keys. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. The host opened his mouth, ready to make a joke about her playing slowly or badly, but the words died in his throat. Maya didn't play chopsticks. She didn't play a simple nursery rhyme. She brought her hands down hard on the keys, and a sound exploded into the room that made everyone jump. It was loud, it was fast, and it was full of power. She wasn't the waitress anymore. She was a musician, and she was ready to show them exactly what she was made of. The arrogance of the host was about to hit a very tall, very hard wall. The sound of the first heavy chord seemed to hang in the air like smoke. It was loud, aggressive, and completely unexpected. For a second, nobody moved. The host, who had been leaning against the piano with a smug grin on his face, flinched. He blinked rapidly, his brain trying to process what he was hearing. He had expected a clumsy version of Happy Birthday or perhaps a simple, stuttering attempt at a classical tune. He expected to laugh. He expected the guests to giggle behind their hands, but this sound was not funny. It was serious. It was filled with a heavy, dark emotion that sucked the air right out of the room. Maya didn't wait for the room to settle. She didn't look up to see if people were bored or interested. Her hands, which had been idle for so long, suddenly knew exactly what to do. It was as if her muscles had a memory of their own. Before her mind could catch up, her fingers were flying across the keys. She started a complex, fast-paced run of notes that cascaded down the piano like a waterfall. The sound was crisp and clean, cutting through the tension of the party like a sharp knife. The guests, who had been holding their drinks and smirking, slowly lowered their glasses. A hush fell over the group near the bar. The clinking of ice cubes stopped. The murmur of conversation died away completely. All eyes turned to the corner of the room. They weren't looking at a waitress anymore. They were looking at a woman who was commanding the space with a power they hadn't expected. Inside, Maya felt a strange sensation. The anger she had felt just moments ago, the humiliation of being treated like a toy, the frustration of her hard life was pouring out of her fingertips. She wasn't just pressing keys, she was fighting a battle. The music she chose was difficult and intense. It required strength. Her hands moved apart, one playing a deep, rumbling bass line while the other danced lightly on the high notes. The contrast was beautiful and a little scary. She sat up straighter. The tiredness that had been weighing down her shoulders seemed to vanish. The uniform she wore, the symbol of her service to them, felt lighter. In her mind, she wasn't sitting on a bench in a rich man's penthouse. She was back in her own world, a place where she didn't have to apologize for who she was. The piano was her sanctuary, and she had just locked the door. The host took a step back, his arms uncrossing and falling to his sides. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of confusion. He looked at the piano, then at Maya's hands, and then back at the guests. He could see that the mood had shifted. He was no longer the controller of the room, he was just an audience member like everyone else. He tried to say something, maybe a joke to break the tension, but the music was too loud. It drowned him out. He was forced to listen. Maya's fingers were a blur now. She played a section of the song that was incredibly fast, a flurry of notes that sounded like rain hitting a tin roof. It was the kind of playing that required years of practice, the kind of skill that cannot be faked. The wealthy guests, many of whom owned expensive art and rare wines, knew true talent when they saw it. They began to exchange glances, not looks of mockery, but looks of genuine surprise and respect. A woman in a red dress near the front whispered to her partner, "Where did she learn to do that?" The partner just shook his head, unable to take his eyes off Maya's hands. The music shifted again. The fast, angry rain of notes slowed down. It turned into something softer, sadder, and deeply emotional. Maya closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about her father. She thought about the long nights at the hospital. She thought about the dreams she had buried. The melody became a cry, a beautiful, heartbreaking sound that made the room feel very small and very intimate. It was the kind of music that touches your heart, that reminds you of your own sadness and your own losses. Even the waiters, who were standing by the kitchen doors with trays of food, stopped moving. They knew Maya. They worked with her every day. They knew she was tired and quiet. They had no idea she carried this kind of magic inside her. One of the younger busboys leaned against the doorframe, his mouth open in awe. He felt a surge of pride for her. She wasn't just serving them anymore, she was showing them that she was bigger than this job. The silence in the room was heavy, but it wasn't an awkward silence anymore. It was a respectful silence. No one dared to cough or shift their weight. They were afraid to miss a single note. The music had woven a spell around them. The rich man with the expensive cigar forgot to smoke it, the ash grew long and eventually fell onto his shoe, but he didn't even notice. He was too busy listening. Maya could feel the energy of the room changing. She could feel their eyes on her, but now it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a connection. She was communicating with them in a language that didn't need words. She was telling them that she was more than her uniform. She was telling them that she had a soul, a history, and a voice. And for the first time that night, they were actually hearing her. Her hands moved to the high end of the keyboard, playing a delicate, twinkling melody that sounded like stars twinkling in the night sky. It was hopeful and pure. Then, suddenly, she brought her left hand down deep into the bass, adding a foundation of strength. The two parts, the light and the dark, swirled together. It was a perfect balance. The host stood there, completely frozen. He had wanted a joke. He had wanted to feel powerful. Instead, he was the one who felt small. He looked at the woman on the bench. He saw the concentration on her face, the slight sway of her body, the way she breathed with the music. He realized he had made a terrible mistake. He had tried to humiliate someone who possessed more depth and talent than anyone else in the room. The realization washed over him like cold water. He felt a lump form in his throat. For the first time in a long time, he felt insignificant. The music was building toward a climax. The notes were getting louder, faster, and more intense. Maya was playing with everything she had. She wasn't holding anything back. She could feel the sweat on her forehead, but she didn't care. Her fingers were starting to ache, but the pain felt good. It was a familiar pain, a reminder of the hours she used to spend practicing. She felt alive. Truly alive. The gray, boring world of rent and bills and rude customers had faded away. There was only the music, the black and white keys, and the sound. She struck a series of chords that were thunderous. The grand piano shook slightly. The sound filled the massive room, bouncing off the high ceilings and the glass windows. It was a roar of defiance. It was the sound of someone saying, "I am here." As the final, massive chord rang out, Maya lifted her hands high into the air. She held the pose, her chest heaving, her fingers trembling slightly. The sound vibrated through the floorboards, through the guests' feet, and into their hearts. It was a moment of perfect clarity. Then, she brought her hands down to her lap. The echo of the piano faded away into silence. The room stayed quiet. No one spoke. No one applauded. They just sat there, stunned, staring at the woman in the black uniform. The spell was broken, but the magic remained. Maya sat there for a moment, looking at the keys, coming back to reality. She slowly exhaled, letting out a breath she felt like she had been holding for years. She was terrified to turn around. She didn't know what she would see on their faces. She only knew that she had told the truth, and for tonight, that was enough. The vibration of the final chord seemed to hang in the air like a heavy cloud. It didn't just fade away, it echoed off the tall windows and the marble floors, vibrating through the soles of the guests' shoes. For a long, stretching moment, nobody made a sound. The room was frozen in time. The only movement was the dust motes dancing in the spotlight that shone down on the black piano. Maya sat with her hands resting lightly on her knees. Her chest was rising and falling, but she kept her eyes lowered, staring at the black and white keys. Her fingers were tingling, buzzing with the energy of the music she had just released. Inside, she felt a strange mix of exhaustion and peace. She had poured everything she had into that performance. She had taken the anger, the sadness, and the years of silence and turned them into sound. Now that it was over, she felt empty, but in a good way. She felt like she had finally exhaled a breath she had been holding for years. The host, the man who had mocked her just minutes before, was standing a few feet away. His mouth was slightly open, and his glass was dangling precariously from his hand. He looked like a statue that had been left out in the cold. The redness in his face from the alcohol had drained away, leaving him looking pale and shocked. He blinked a few times, as if he was trying to wake up from a dream. The arrogance that had coated him like a thick layer of expensive cologne was gone. In its place was a look of total confusion. He looked at the woman in the uniform, then back at the piano, unable to connect the two things in his mind. Slowly, the spell began to break. An older woman standing near the front let out a small, shaky breath. Then, a man in a tuxedo, who had been leaning against a pillar with his arms crossed, slowly uncrossed them. He dropped his hands to his sides. The silence in the room wasn't awkward anymore, it was respectful. It was the kind of quiet that happens when people witness something they know they will never see again. From the back of the room, a single pair of hands started clapping. It wasn't fast or rhythmic. It was slow, deliberate applause. It was the clap you give when you have no words left. Within seconds, another person joined in. Then another. The sound grew, swelling from a gentle patter to a wave of genuine appreciation. It wasn't the polite, bored clapping that happens at charity events when someone finishes a boring speech. This was real. The guests were looking at Maya with new eyes. They weren't seeing a waitress anymore, they were seeing an artist. They were seeing a human being who had just bared her soul to them. Maya didn't turn around to soak in the applause. She didn't stand up and take a bow. That wasn't why she played. She sat there for a moment longer, letting the reality of the room seep back in. She heard the clapping, but it felt distant, like it was happening underwater. She was still thinking about the music, still feeling the ghost of the melody in her fingers. She knew that if she stood up and faced them, the magic would break completely. She would have to go back to being the person who served drinks. Finally, she took a deep breath and stood up. The bench scraped softly against the floor. As she stood, the clapping got louder. Some people even shouted out "Bravo!" The host flinched at the noise. It seemed to wake him up from his daze. He realized that everyone was looking at the woman he had tried to make a fool of, and they were cheering for her. He realized he was the only one who looked small. He took a shaky step forward, moving toward her. He wanted to say something. He wanted to regain control of the situation. He opened his mouth, his lips moving, but no sound came out. He had planned to make a joke, to laugh it off, to give her the $100 and send her back to the kitchen. But he couldn't do it. The money in his pocket felt suddenly heavy and useless. He couldn't offer her money for what she had just done. It would be like trying to buy a sunset. Maya turned to face him. Her face was calm. There were no tears, but her eyes were bright. She looked at him not with anger, but with a quiet dignity. She didn't say a word. She just looked at him, waiting for him to speak. The host swallowed hard. He looked at the guests, then back at Maya. I didn't. He stammered. His voice, which had been so loud and bossy earlier, was barely a whisper now. He cleared his throat, trying to find his voice. I had no idea, he managed to say. That was incredible. It wasn't much of a speech, but it was honest. For the first time all night, he wasn't acting. He was completely stripped of his pretense. He looked at her with a mixture of awe and shame. He realized that he had tried to humiliate a master, and she had humbled him without saying a single word. He was speechless, just as the story promised, but it wasn't just because the music was good. It was because he realized that for all his money and his power, he couldn't buy what she had. He couldn't buy the passion, or the pain, or the talent that lived in her fingertips. Maya gave him a small, polite nod. It wasn't a nod of submission, and it wasn't a nod of superiority. It was just a nod of acknowledgement. She accepted his clumsy compliment, but she didn't let it define her. She didn't need his validation to know that she had played well. She knew it in her heart. She smoothed down the front of her apron. It was a simple, unconscious gesture, but it spoke volumes. She was signaling that she was done. The performance was over. The musician was going back into hiding, and the waitress was returning. If you'll excuse me, she said softly. Her voice was quiet, but in the silent room, Everyone could hear her clearly. "I have work to do." She didn't wait for him to answer. She didn't wait for him to offer her a job or a check. She turned and walked away from the piano. As she walked, the crowd parted for her. It wasn't out of fear, like before. It was out of respect. People stepped aside to let her pass, their eyes following her every move. The waiters by the kitchen door stood up straighter, watching her with pride. She walked with her head high, her back straight, moving through the room like a queen returning to her people. The host watched her go. He stood there by the piano, looking lonely and foolish. He looked down at his hands, then at the instrument. He reached out and touched the keys gently, as if they were hot to the touch. He knew he would never hear that piano sound the same way again. He had tried to use her for a cheap laugh, and instead, she had given him a moment of truth that he would never forget. The music had stopped, but the feeling remained. The room felt different now. The artificial laughter and the fake smiles were gone, replaced by a somber, thoughtful atmosphere. The guests looked at their drinks differently. They looked at each other differently. They realized that the person serving them food might have a story just as deep and complex as their own. They realized that talent and beauty don't always wear a tuxedo or a diamond necklace. Sometimes, they wear a black uniform and carry a silver tray. Maya reached the kitchen doors and pushed them open. The noise and heat of the kitchen hit her face. The clatter of pots and pans, the shouting of chefs, the smell of onions and grease, it was her reality. As the doors swung shut behind her, cutting off the view of the grand ballroom, she let out a long breath. Her hands were shaking slightly now, the adrenaline wearing off. She leaned against the stainless steel counter for a second and looked at her palms. She had done it. She had walked into the lion's den, and she had roared. And now, she had to go back to washing dishes and clearing tables. But something had changed. She knew it, and they knew it. She wasn't just the waitress anymore. She was the woman who left the millionaire speechless. And that was a victory no one could ever take away from her. The heavy metal door swung shut behind her, cutting off the stunned silence of the ballroom and replacing it with the chaotic noise of the kitchen. The air here was thick and hot, filled with the smell of roasted garlic, sizzling butter, and the sharp tang of cleaning bleach. Pots were clanging, and the head chef was shouting orders about a stack of plates that needed to go out immediately. For a second, Maya felt dizzy. It was like being pulled out of a dream and thrown into cold water. She walked over to a stainless steel counter and set her tray down hard. Her hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that was still rushing through her veins. She looked at her palms. They were red and marked from the heavy work she did every day, but for a few minutes, they had been magical. She clenched her fists, trying to hold onto the feeling of the keys, the vibration of the strings, and the power she had felt. The kitchen staff didn't look at her the way they usually did. Usually, she was just Maya, the quiet girl who worked hard and kept her head down. But now, the line cooks were peeking out from behind the warmers, and the dishwasher had stopped spraying water to stare at her. They had heard the music. Even through the heavy doors, the sound of the piano had cut through the noise of the kitchen. They knew something incredible had just happened. One of the younger waiters, a guy who usually complained about his feet hurting, walked up to her slowly. His eyes were wide. "Maya," he whispered, like he was afraid to speak too loud. "Was that you? We thought it was a recording or something." Maya looked at him and a small, tired smile touched her lips. It was the first real smile she had worn all night. "Yeah," she said softly. "That was me." Before anyone could say anything else, the double doors pushed open again. The room went quiet instantly. The host of the party walked in. He looked completely out of place in his expensive suit amidst the steam and the stainless steel. The chefs paused, their spoons hovering over the pots. The host didn't care about the food or the mess. His eyes were scanning the room, searching for her. When he saw Maya standing by the counter, he stopped. He looked different now. His arrogance had melted away, replaced by a strange kind of desperation. He walked over to her, ignoring the grease on the floor and the smell of food. He was holding a thick envelope in his hand. It was stuffed with cash. He stopped in front of her, looking down at her uniform, then up at her face. He seemed to be struggling to find the right words. The man who had been so loud and bossy earlier was now fumbling like a schoolboy. He started, then cleared his throat. I have never heard anything like that. Not in this city, not anywhere. He held out the envelope. Please. Take this. It is not a tip. It is appreciation. It is $5,000. Maya looked at the envelope. It was thick. That money would pay her rent for 6 months. It would fix her car. It would buy her father the medicine he needed without her having to work double shifts for a month. It was a life-changing amount of money. The host saw her looking at it and thought he had won. He thought he could fix the awkwardness, fix his own guilt, by throwing money at her. And, he added quickly, his voice gaining a little speed. I have connections. I know people at the conservatory. I can get you an audition. I can pay for your lessons again. You shouldn't be working here. You should be on a stage. I can make that happen for you. Just say the word. The kitchen staff held their collective breath. It sounded like a fairy tale. A rich man swooping in to save the talented girl. It was the kind of thing that happened in movies, the kind of thing everyone dreamed of. They waited for Maya to grab the envelope, to say thank you, to cry and hug him. But Maya didn't move. She looked at the money, and then she looked into the host's eyes. She saw that he was genuine, but she also saw that he still didn't understand. He thought music was a commodity. He thought talent was something you bought and sold, just like the art on his walls or the expensive wine in his glass. She slowly reached out and gently pushed his hand back, closing the envelope. No, she said. Her voice was soft, but it was firm. The host blinked, confused. No, but why, this is your chance. You are too good to be a waitress. Maya took a deep breath. I am a waitress because I have to be right now. But that piano, that music, that belongs to me. It's the one thing in my life that money didn't give me and money can't take away. If I take this money, I feel like I'm selling the part of me that is free. I didn't play for you to buy me. I played because you made me angry, and I needed to speak. Now I've spoken, and I'm done. The host stood there, stunned. He looked at the envelope in his hand, and then at the woman standing in front of him. For the first time in his life, he realized that money wasn't actually the most powerful thing in the room. He had met someone who had more dignity in her greasy uniform than he had in his $1,000 suit. He couldn't argue with her. He couldn't buy her integrity. I don't know what to say, he whispered. You don't have to say anything, Maya said kindly. Just enjoy the party. I have work to finish. She turned her back on him and picked up a clean rag. She started wiping down the counter, wiping away the imaginary dirt, trying to clean her soul and prepare to go back to work. It was the ultimate dismissal. She had rendered the richest man in the room powerless, and then she had gone back to her job as if he didn't matter. The host stood there for another moment, looking at her back. Then, slowly, he turned and walked out of the kitchen. The doors swung shut behind him. He didn't go back to the party. He walked over to the window and looked out at the city lights. He felt small, but strangely, he also felt awake. For years, he had been sleepwalking through his life, surrounded by yes men and people who wanted his money. Tonight, for 10 minutes, he had been in the presence of something real. And it had shaken him to his core. Maya finished her shift without any more incidents. The guests treated her differently when she went back out. They didn't snap their fingers at her. They nodded respectfully. Some of them even whispered thank you when she took their glasses. The atmosphere in the room had changed. The arrogance had been punctured. There was a quietness in the corners now, a respect for the hidden depths of the people around them. At the end of the night, the music was still playing from the speakers, but it felt hollow compared to what had happened earlier. The staff gathered their things to leave. Maya clocked out, hanging up her apron in the locker room. She felt tired, deep down in her bones, but she also felt light. She walked out of the building and into the cool night air. The city was loud, horns honking and people rushing, but she felt peaceful. She walked to the bus stop, her purse over her shoulder. She didn't have the $5,000. She didn't have a contract with a record label. She was still just Maya, a working-class girl trying to survive. But she had something else now. She had the memory of the silence in that room. She had the look on the host's face when he realized he couldn't buy her. She had proven to herself that she hadn't lost her gift. It was still there, waiting under the surface, whenever she needed it. The bus pulled up, its doors sighing open with a hiss. Maya stepped on and found a seat near the back. She leaned her head against the cold glass and watched the lights of the city blur past. She closed her eyes and listened to the hum of the engine. In her head, the music was still playing, soft and clear. She wasn't rich, and she wasn't famous, but tonight, she was the one who walked away with the prize. She had her dignity, and that was worth more than all the money in the world. The millionaire was left standing in his empty tower with his money, but Maya had her song. And that was enough.